Well, Mike, it's lovely to speak to you. You've had a fantastic career so far in journalism, and you've had a very varied career as well. And I always think of you as Mr. Exclusive. You have seemed to have brought lots of great stories to the table. Before I talk to you about those stories and obviously the most recent project that you've been working on, how did you get into it? I mean, was that something as a kid that you aspired to be a journalist? Were you always nosy and looking for gossip? I mean, what is it about your personality that leads you to be a journalist?
It's exactly that, Cheesy. It was from being a little kid. I got my first season ticket at Oldham from my mate's dad, my Uncle Vinny, and I think it was about 10. And I used to take I must have been the only 10-year-old in the country that bought a dictaphone. And I'd take it to the games and we'd sit up in the old Lucas stand, me and my mate Chris, and we'd do commentaries of the games. And I can only imagine how annoying that must have been for the people who sat around us. So I'd always been into that kind of side of things. I remember for my 8th birthday, my mum bought me a typewriter because my favourite lessons at school were my English lessons when I could, write stories and take yourself away to different places. So I had always wanted to be a journalist, but I did a politics degree, stupidly. And it's one of those degrees that's it's good for nothing, basically, when you come out of university. And I went travelling for a year and I got back around Australia and came back. And I was like, the only firm that was taking on people with degrees that didn't specify what degree it had to be was a travel agency called Flight Centre. There was one in the Arndale and there was one on Mosley Street. There was a student version next to the Aquatic Centre on Oxford Road. And it was a sales job, really. And the thing with working for them, we got to charge people whatever we wanted. So you can only imagine some of the kind of underhand shenanigans you got up to. And it was great, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed talking to people about travelling. And you're always in a good mood, aren't you, when you go into travel agents, because you're going somewhere. But we'd have targets every month, and you'd hit your target, and it'd be great. You'd go out and get drunk, and then you'd wake up the next morning with a hangover. You'd go in, your total on the whiteboard would be 0, and you'd have to start and do it all again. And I moved up to Scotland and worked in their branch on Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow. And it was a similar thing. We did well, but I just always wanted to be a journalist, and it wouldn't go away. And I just spoke to my parents, and they recognised that I wasn't that happy in my work, and they said, "Well, you've always wanted to be a journalist. Why don't you try that?" And to do that, and it's similar now. You've got to do a postgraduate diploma in journalism. And my parents, bless them, said that, we'll pay for the course. You can move back in with us. I think I was 27 at this stage, so it was very good of them. And I got my own, because when I was at sixth form college and at uni, I worked in the bakery at Sainsbury's in Oldham, loved it. And I got my old job back at weekends in the bakery at Sainsbury's, packed my job in Glasgow, went back to Preston, where I'd been before, and did the newspaper journalism. Absolutely loved it. Felt a bit old when I went into the old nightclubs in Preston from yesteryear. But no, loved it at uni and took it from there, really. And then on the course I got, you try and sort your work experience out. I did 2 weeks at the Press Association out in Howden, which was sport, but it was boring, Cheesy. It was like, can you do the results from last night and can you update the league tables? And that's just not, my idea of journalism is from all the president's men, as everybody says, Woodward and Bernstein, finding things out that people don't want out there, for me, is what it should all be about. And that wasn't it. So I went to the Evening News, who were kind enough to give me a 2-week placement. They'd laid a load of people off on the Friday before I started on the Monday. And the place was struggling to get used to not having those reporters there. So there was a load of stuff to do that I don't think people would get on work experience now. So I remember it was in the news department, not in sport. And on my first day, there'd been a fire in Limeside in Oldham, and they'd rescued some puppies from this fire. It was on the fire service voice bank used to call for stories. And I just said, I'll go up, and knocked on a few doors. People spoke to me, got a picture of the puppies, and that was it, really. Took it from there. So I did my 2 weeks at the Evening News, loved it. They asked me back when I finished for think it was 3 months, and then the 3 months turned to 6, and then after the 6, named me member of staff.
What are the stories then that you've worked on during your career? Because I know you spent some time in the States and now you're working for the Mail, which is obviously a very esteemed national newspaper or newspaper group. What are the stories that you've been most proud of? And have there been any stories where you've sort of felt a bit compromised, you know, say it's about a club or a person that you really like and admire, and you find out something that you didn't really want to find out? And have you ever been in that position where you think, do I go with this story or do I protect the person that the story's about? Perhaps that's an unfair question, but it's something that's occurred to me during my career.
Yeah, no, it's not cheesy. And especially when I was a news reporter at the MEN, I never felt it more when you'd be sent on what they used to call a death knock. So, and people shouldn't take that the wrong way. It was just what we called it, and it was if there'd been a tragedy, it was somebody's, and we were writing about it because it's news. It was somebody's job to go and knock on the door of the husband, wife, parents, and see if they wanted to say nice things about the person that had passed away. And there were times where I remember the car journeys you drive from the office to wherever it was. I'd feel sick to the pit of my stomach knowing that this person had just lost a loved one, and here's me turning up, knocking on the door, asking if they want to speak to the paper. But I'll tell you what, a lot of people did. That surprised me. A lot of people were, I wouldn't say pleased to see it, that's the wrong thing, but they would be very open because the evening news, it's not like some of the national papers. Everybody, maybe not so much these days, but everybody treated the MEN as a friend that was on their side, which it was and it still is. So people would invite you inside, and I think they were certain, not everybody. There were a couple of incidents where people threatened violence, and you can see that. And all I ever was courteous. You know, if you don't want to speak, that's fine. I'd never, you hear these ridiculous stories about people putting the foot in the door to try and get a word and that. And I'd never do that. I don't think any of us ever did that. But yeah, some people would find it, I think, helpful to talk about their loved one and make sure that we wrote some nice things about them in the MEN. In fact, I'll never forget the first one that I had to do was on a traveller's site in Salford. And what had happened was two young lads from the site had stolen a car. The police had chased after him and they'd crashed his car. And unfortunately, the two lads, they're only young teenagers, had died. And we obviously had the statement from GMP. So I went into this site in Salford, absolutely bricking myself. God knows, these people want me here with my new shiny suit on from Burton's, turning fresh out of uni. And knocked on the door, and the guy who ran the site, and I think this was Paddy Doherty, I might be wrong because it's a long time ago, huge guy comes out, dripping in gold, and I'm thinking, I shouldn't be here. And he was great, and he took me over to the mum of the two boys and said, speak to this chap. He wants to come and get your side of the story, because all we got was this dry press release from GMP. And years later, I was at, I think it was Agecroft Cemetery, and I went past a headstone, and it actually had the write-up that I'd done on the headstone, which was just, it's the opposite end of what you think would happen. So there is, that taught me that some people do actually want to see you, but it never stopped me from hating it. And then, when you go into sport, you've got to try and protect people that look after you. I would say on a daily basis, I get bits of information from people, and there's always the caveat, you didn't get this from me. And that's just the way it works. That's, people aren't going to tell you the juicy stuff if you're going to tell the world that they've told you. So I know people sometimes get frustrated, tell us who your sources are. But if you start doing that, then you just don't get any stories.
You must have heard the criticism from football fans, particularly about, there being agendas in the media. Yeah. And I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question, because I'm certainly not trying to put you on the spot, but, do you believe that there are certain clubs that you may, and this is not just you, but generally, that people who are journalists might not like, that they're more likely to look for a negative story on than the team that they support? So you're an Oldham Athletic fan, you might be less inclined to look for a bad story on Oldham and more inclined, and I'm just using this hypothetically, to look for a story on Rochdale because they might be seen as Oldham's rivals? Or is it the other way around, that because you're a supporter, you almost want to be a critical friend? I mean, how does that dynamic work?
I think if you said to them at the moment at Oldham that I'm always looking for positive stories and not trying to bash Oldham, they'd probably have a difference of opinion with you. I think it's difficult covering the team that you support. Carl Marsden, I don't know if you know Carl, he did Oldham for the Advertiser. And when I started doing it for the Evening News, because obviously we're in the same stable of newspapers, and I said, what's it like? And Carl's an Oldham fan as well. And I don't know if you can put this on the video, but he said it's like walking into your mum and dad's bedroom and they are doing things that no child should see their parents do. And he says, this is the comparison. You love them, but when you cover them, you see things that you don't want to see. And I think that was a great bit of advice from Carl, because he's right. It destroys, well, it did at Oldham for me, it destroyed a little bit that pure belief you've got of, I'm an Oldham fan, everybody who puts on that blue shirt is doing their best for Oldham. They're all in it for the good of the club. And you see, just how football clubs work. It's not specifically Oldham. I do know of other reporters who are hypercritical of the clubs that they support. I do know of other reporters who I won't name who are less critical of clubs that they support. It used to annoy me that, because I know, and you'll know this, that City fans think that there's an agenda in certain sections of the media against City. I can't deny that I look at stories written about Manchester City and I wonder if those stories would be written about any other club. I don't think it's as bad as the City fans think it is, but there is certainly, there's something there. But people don't like what they think Manchester City is. So you and I, I've City fans in my family. I went to St Bede's School. I worked in Manchester. I know loads of City fans, and for me, the romance of what's happened at City kind of outstrips anything else. So, my cousin Andy went watching City all over the country, and Oldham used to beat him a lot, and you give him some grief. And he's been to these places, the Yorks, the Macclesfields, etc. So for me, to see them now go there in Champions League finals, ludicrous. I think that's a great story. There are people who are detached from it, I think, who look at where the money comes from and human rights records and all that kind of stuff, and they can't detach the two, and they don't like it. And I think City do get a raw deal in certain quarters. Certainly, I would say not from me. In fact, what I used to like at the Evening News, and this was where being an Oldham fan came in handy. You'd always get grief. You're blue if you'd written something negative about United. You're a red if you'd written something negative about City. So to be an Oldham fan, it's like, no, I'm not. I'm an Oldham fan. Like, there is no bias. And if I was getting it in the net from both sides, then I kind of think you're doing your job. I'd even get voicemails in the office because your number used to go in the paper in the MEN, and people would phone you up maybe after they'd had a couple of an evening and leave you abusive voicemail messages. But yeah, it's football, and it's all in good fun. But it is, I do get that there's a frustration among City fans.
Richard Burgess, who at one time was at the Evening News and was a lifelong City fan, got what he considered to be his dream job and became the City correspondent for Stuart Brennan and Chris Bailey and whatnot. And Richard, I remember saying to me, very similar to what you've just said, in that he couldn't really be a supporter of the club anymore because he'd seen the inner workings of the club, and now he's gone on to other things and made a great success of his career. So I understand that, and I've had the same balancing act in my life because I'm a lifelong fan, but also I hear and see and find out things that sometimes I wish I hadn't found out. But at the same time, I feel compromised because I don't want to reveal those things and damage, my club. Now, if you tried to build a career which is solely around Oldham Athletic, you wouldn't have had the stellar career that you've had, and you have had a tremendous career. I mean, if I was to ask you what your What is the story you're most proud of?
It's a good question. I think more than one story that stands out. I think it's being fortunate enough on an almost daily basis, not daily, but certainly a weekly basis, to break stories that other people don't know about. So on a regular basis, you are telling people stories that they didn't know and that certain people didn't want out there.
Which is a rarity these days, isn't it? Because most people now don't get those exclusives, do they?
Yeah, and I mean, it's fortunate for people like me because, and God, this is going to sound really ageist and like it's always better in our day, but I do think that with younger generations, and this is certainly isn't everyone because there's some fantastic young journalists knocking about. I think there is a tendency among some, and it's just the era that they've been brought up in, the digital era, to just email people all the time. It's like if I was ever in an editor's position and I was training my reporters, get on the phone, get out of your chair, go and take someone for a drink, go and take someone for a coffee. See if you get along with them. See if you can build a trust with them, and then that's when they'll start telling you things. And that's the best bit of my job, Cheesy. I mean, there are days where I'll go out and meet someone and we'll have a laugh and a bit of lunch, and you'll get some information. And you sat there thinking, I'm out with somebody whose company I enjoy. I can stick the bill through on expenses. It's never a huge bill. And they're going to give me a decent story, and I'm going to get paid for this. Yeah, and those are the days when it's the best in the world. I think recently stories that have stuck out, the Big Ten ganging up on City, writing the letter to UEFA about the punishments. That was a decent one. I was trying to think ones from this year. There's a funny one about Fulham's ground where somebody had strapped a listening device underneath the BT Sport gantry and caused all kind of security nightmares. And then there's stories where you are clear, and this isn't as often in sport as it is in news, but you are clearly sticking up for the right person. You're doing the right thing. So we launched a campaign at the Mail before Christmas calling on football to finally tackle its dementia scandal. And I sat down with Chris Sutton, who's our columnist, and he's a great guy, Chris. I know he's not everybody's taste on the Five Live phoning, but honestly, underneath that, he's a great guy. And obviously, he had the horrendous situation with his dad, Mike, who was a professional footballer, diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and obviously the support that he needed was not there from the PFA and from other places. So we sat down at the hotel at Norwich's football ground, and we just said, right, what didn't your dad get? What aren't dementia sufferers, former footballers, not getting that they should get? And we came up with a 7-point charter. And you know what the Daily Mail's like, Cheesy, when it goes for somebody, it can be quite a powerful thing. And we did it in November, and here we are in June, and we've got, I'd say, 5 out of the 7 things that we call for in place. So the PFA have set up a dementia task force. We're hearing all the time from people whose stories that we've told, the PFA have been in touch and are now giving them financial support. Danny Robson, who I used to work with at the MEN, her dad, Jimmy Robson, the Burnley legend, is one of those. I've become quite close with John Stiles, Nobby's son, who's been very vocal and forthright. And these are inspirational people. And when you've got John, telling a story about his dad, who's everybody in this country of a certain age is aware of and knows about, dancing around on Wembley in '66. These are our heroes who need to be looked after. And I think because of what we've achieved, and with others, there are other newspapers that have banged this drum as well. But I think the impetus that we've given it since November has been a force for good. And that's the kind of stuff that you're proud of, not trying breaking a transfer story, even though it's good to get them. Stuff like that where you're actually helping someone with what you're doing is pretty rare these days.
Have you got any regrets, Mike, about anything that you've done or said or could have done?
Not really. I don't like regrets, because you just learn from it, and you can't change what's gone before you, so just concentrate on what's ahead. I would have liked to spend a bit longer in America, so I moved over 2015 to become the director of comms at San Jose Earthquakes, and at the time I was with my then partner, an American girl, and we planned to build a life in America, and to go to, so we lived in San Francisco, which is only about 45-minute drive to San Jose. And for a lad from Oldham to live in the Bay Area with that climate and going to the beach every weekend and all that, it was amazing. And there's some great people in MLS, and I really do believe that MLS will become bigger and bigger and bigger. And it was a great job, and I loved the job. I thought I did well at the job. We were getting a lot more coverage, which was the aim after I got there, and things were going really well. But unfortunately, without going too deep into it, the relationship wasn't great. And that, being honest, was more me than her. And my old boss at the Mail, after I've been there about 7 months, said, we've got an opportunity here for you to come back and do a new, bigger role. I know you've only just gone, but are you interested? And I was interested. And I came back, but I still look out for San Jose's results. I'm still in touch with the people there. And I'd be lying if I said, when I look out my window sometimes and it's snowing in April, I wonder what might have been if I'd have stuck it out there. But as I said, no regrets. I'm fortunate to have worked over there, albeit for such a short space of time.
You turned poacher to gamekeeper there, didn't you? I mean, that's, you were dealing with the press, trying to find story. I mean, it might not be quite the same in the MLS, I don't know, but people trying to find stories on you, and you're trying to do the positive PR. So that gave you a great insight as a journalist. Now you're back on the other side of the fence again as to how to handle all of that.
It did. And you do have a sympathy for the press officers, because you're speaking to, 5, 6, 7 of them every day. So, you can quite easily put yourself in their shoes. One thing I'd say, a big difference out there, their press are not like our press. So they all want you to succeed. They all want you to do well. They all want to write nice stories about you. So it's not, I can only imagine the nightmares that people, for example, the Big Six breakaway. If you put yourself in the shoes of somebody at one of those Big Six clubs, it's not their decision. They've had nothing to do with joining this ESL. This bomb gets dropped on them on the Friday afternoon, as it was, and it's like, right, we're doing this. We're announcing it on Sunday. Like, I can only imagine what that weekend, because they knew, right? These people, I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, knew what the reaction was going to be. And if it was down to them, their clubs would have been nowhere near it. So it did help, but I can't say that being the director of comms for an MLS team was anything like it would be for a Premier League team. Certainly not.
I'm sure. I mean, obviously you are as we said, a sort of cutting edge journalist, Mr. Exclusive. You've also written a book. I mean, that's been one of your most recent projects. And it is about your, shall we call him, your first love, Oldham Athletic. Was that done then as a love project rather than, as a hard-nosed journalist, or what was your motivation for doing that?
It was Gordon Lawton, really, as you know Gordy well. Gordy was the programme editor, a bit of commercial. He did everything at Latics, and he's been there since, I think he was there 1985, something like that, when he joined. So when I covered Oldham for the MEN, Gordy, I got to know Gordy pretty well, and we used to have a great laugh. And he said, he reminisced a lot about the great team under Joe and what they did, but also about what the characters were like and some of the shenanigans that they got up to off the pitch, some uproarious stuff. And he said, you should write a book on this. And he emailed me the numbers to get me started. I've still got the email somewhere, and it's as I've said before, Cheesy, for a kid whose heroes these were, to get an email with Andy Ritchie's number, Ian Marshall, Andy Barlow, Dennis Irwin, incredible. And that was obviously, I'm not sure how long Gordy's been gone now. I think it's probably a couple of years at least, but this would have been 5-6 years ago. And it's so I started it, and I started traveling the country interviewing. And Joe Royle was magnificent when I've been to Joe Royle's house about 6 times. And everybody's been, I think everyone's like, yeah, this is a story that's not been told, and everybody's embraced it. And the players have been incredibly open. The only problem has been because obviously I've got a full-time job to do. I can only do it on my days off and my holidays when my other half will let me. So that's why it's taken 5-6 years to get it done. And I'd started it off to write it really for the younger Oldham fans, because it's horrendous being an Oldham fan. Let's be honest, it's just been nothing for us for a long time. And they, at least when I was a kid, I saw them at Wembley twice, and I saw us in the Premier League. And I saw us beat United when I was at St Bede's, and I walked into that playground at St Bede's the next day. You know what I mean? One of the greatest mornings of my life. The only Oldham fan in the bloody place. So for people to support that football team now and to not have even witnessed that, I thought, well, this will be nice, you know, for them. But then when you're hearing the stories and how daft they are, but then when you also speak to Willie Donachie and you get an insight into the training methods, and then you speak to Joe and you find out that when Joe was playing for Everton in England and City in England, and obviously wages weren't what they are now. So Joe had a sideline business. He said when the other players played golf, he'd buy and sell used cars. And that wheeler dealer throughout to subsidise his playing career, he translated into management. And you're hearing stories like that and you think, you know what, I think this like goes beyond Oldham. I think if I was, I love football, I love reading football books, but if this was, I don't know, for example, a similar size to like a Luton or somebody like that, I'd want to read it. And then, yeah, the publisher got involved, sent a synopsis, sent them the chapter breakdown, and they agreed. They said, we think this goes far, the interest will go far beyond Oldham. So we'll soon find out, Cheesy, if it does or not.
What's the book called then? And it's August, isn't it, when it's out?
26th, yeah. You can get it now on pre-order. It's on Amazon, but if you want 25% off, it's Reach, the publisher. So if you just Google Reach and This Is How It Feels. So it's called This Is How It Feels after the Inspiral Carpets song, An English Football Miracle. And it fits nicely because going back to that, for the young Oldham fans, it's kind of this is how it feels when Oldham is the good football team. But Graham Lambert from the Inspirals is a big Oldham fan, and he's been very helpful in the book, and he's told me some great stories, more outside of the story of the football, about the culture at the time, because obviously it's the height of the Manchester explosion, you know, the Mondays, the Roses, and the Carpets themselves, and they appeared on Top of the Pops during it all, and they were playing to big sold-out gigs around the country, and the day after Oldham had lost to Forest at Wembley, they played at Nottingham Rock City and got a load of grief from the crowd. But that summer, they played GMEX and it was an 11,000 sellout. So it's just, it all builds into it. It's the music, the politics of the time. There's a bit on that. Obviously, it was poll tax, 89, so how that impacted on everybody. And just on the town itself, you know, how this amazing football team that came out of nowhere kind of lifted a town itself from out of the doldrums.
My claim to fame is I played in David Ayres' testimonial, and Graham Lambert replaced me as a substitute, which was David Moyes' decision because he was the manager that day. So that great moment for me. That. What's the future for you now, Mike? I mean, you've still got a long time to go in your career. Is it going to stay in national newspapers? Have you got ambitions to go elsewhere? Something that you want to do on your bucket list?
It's something. I'm 43 this month, and it is something you do tend to think about your future more. I always think because once you get over like late 30s, 40s, you start thinking, I'm actually now closer to death than I am to being born, so I better make the most of what time I've got left. I still love it. I still love the job. As I said, you know, there was a day last week where I was out all day meeting people, speaking to people, getting stories. You never lose that buzz from breaking stories. I think when I first started, I was always like, I would never, ever want to go into like an editor's role or anything like that. Because for me, it is the Bernstein and Woodward. It's the getting out there, being the guy who gets the story, being the girl who gets the story. So, and that never gets boring. But I do, as I get older, I do think it might be nice at some point to kind of set up a team. So whether that's an investigations team, for example, or a sports department, and just, you know, lead that team. I read the autobiography of Harry Evans, the old MEN editor who went across to America, incredible success, Sunday Times. You know, he was in charge of the Sunday Times when they had their Insight team, and they did the thalidomide scandals, among many others. And that's going back to the dementia stuff, you know, that's the big hitting stuff that helps people. So, look, the state of the industry is what the state of the industry is. You know, these are not great times for print journalism. Circulations continue to fall, not as quickly as they have done before, but you've got to think about your own future and safeguarding that, whether it's, you know, the Times do a great job with their digital subscriptions. Mail Online is an absolute behemoth with, you know, incredible numbers of hits that we hope will look after us. So look, I would love to stay in journalism, and if I ever stop doing the job that I do, that's the kind of direction I'd like to move into. But you know what, as long as I can enjoy work, because you've got to enjoy work, haven't you? You know, Cheesy, it's such a big portion of your life. As long as I can enjoy work, then you know, I'll be happy.